So a few days ago when I started up this car to take her to the DMV to register her, I got a loud knock. Here's the clip.
Well, that's not a good sound. V10's going on the back burner because we're gonna be rebuilding this motor. How deep, I have no idea yet, but that's not a good sound.
At first, I thought it's a rod knock because I wasn't awake all the way. Later, after listening to it for a little bit, it's obviously not a rod knock. Thought it might be valves or a chain guide broke off and the chain is slapping around in there, which most likely is the case because after I shut the car off, I came up to the motor again to look at it for whatever reason, and I literally heard the chain slide off from the cylinder head somewhere down. So it's obviously loose. I figured we're at 180,000 miles. This engine has probably not been really maintained properly, right? These chain guides, they have a tendency to break. Figured, you know what, I'll take the heads off, I'll rebuild them, and that's what this next series is gonna be about. So with that being said, welcome to Yev's Builds. Here's our problem. Do you see this? Timing chain guide? It's busted. And this piece is broken somewhere. And it, from what I understand, when it busts, it kind of slides it, because the chain goes like that into a V shape, and it just slides it from this side all the way down like right here and over. And that is partially the reason. Yeah, I mean, at least the cams look good, so I'm happy about that. It's a mess, let's be honest, but we're taking the Vanos off next. You've seen me take off these rails over here. Do not confuse them because the TIS, the BMW TIS, says that the left head and the right head are different for some reason. They look the same to me, but I marked them and we should be good on that. After you remove those rails, we're gonna be taking off the Vanos. Take a 14 mil, release this oil line. Make sure that when you're gonna be putting these back on, you replace these washers. Now that we got the high pressure line removed, plug it up. We're gonna be rotating the cam, the intake cam, back and forth just to get rid of that pressure that's inside the Vanos system, right? Just kind of rotate it, plug it up. Don't really plug it, but just have it like drain into something soft, right? Give it a couple pushes back and forth. You push it back all the way as far back as you can, so it kind of locks up, right, against the direction of the rotation that the motor spins in. And we're gonna do the same thing to the exhaust cam. Plug it up and do, oh, cool, dude. There's no room because of ABS. Love it. This is gonna be real fun. Definitely didn't realize how big of a project this is gonna be, but dude, first off, before we take the Vanos off, you wanna remove this whole unit. This sits on top of everything, right? Banjo bolts, remove them. They connect to each Vanos side, right? You remove these two screws that hold on to it. There's two screws on each side of this, right? Then this whole piece just removes as one unit. Put that aside and then come down here. Take the thermostat housing, which is this, unloosen all these bolts. They're 10 mils, just unloosen them. I mean, you can't take it off still because the thermostat is on the very bottom and it's just gonna be pushing itself into the water pump itself. You can't remove it without removing the water pump. But to remove the water pump, you need to remove this pulley. Take the cap off, there's gonna be a Torx screw. It's gonna be a really long screw. It's this screw right here. Remove this little nut right here. It's gonna be a 13 mil. Once you remove this, up next is the bracket. Once you remove that bracket, you take the alternator. There's two bolts over here. You take these two bolts, you remove them, you unscrew them, and you put the alternator to the side. And then you come down to the main crank pulley. You remove these 6 bolts, the 13 mils. You take this pulley off, and then you gotta remove this guy. By removing this is the only way you can get the water pump off. This piece right here covers the bottom 2 bolts, and you just can't get to the water pump without removing this. So we're gonna be putting this back on, but right before we do that, we'll just clean this area up a little bit. And we're moving on to Vanos. Dude, this is a hell of a job. Now, once you get this far, I'm gonna try to remove the Vanos. I'm following the TIS. That's the dealership stuff that they use to work on engines. And I'm just following their procedure, their instructions. So if this doesn't work, I don't know, we're gonna have to figure something out. But it claims to put the motor at top dead center, meaning cylinder 1, the cams are pointing at themselves like that, which means the valves are fully up and the piston is fully up, which means there's no connection there. It means that is the top dead center. So put that over there. If you look at the harmonic balancer, this wheel right here, there's a little engraving. It says OIT on there. That engraving on the harmonic balancer means it's top dead center, OIT. You put this little tool in there, take a wrench. I have an adjustable one just because I don't have a size this big. You take your camshafts and you retard them. You rotate these camshafts as far back against the rotation of what they naturally spin in, right? So you, once they're locked and they go as far back as they can, you leave it at that, and that's what BMW claims for us to do. You do the same thing on that side. Next up, after you do all this, we come back here, we remove this timing tool, right? We'll remove it, and you give it one full circle until that engraving comes back a full rotation. You might think, well, isn't it still gonna be at top dead center? No, it will not, because the way it works is one full crank rotation does not mean it's gonna be at top dead center every single time. Currently, it is on the complete opposite of top dead center. See these lobes on the camshafts? They're pointing away from each other, which means the valves are engaged, which means it's not a top dead center. So you take your 10 mil and you give a couple turns. So you see this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6 visible screws that you can see and are able to reach, you loosen them up. All right? Give it a couple turns. That is the 6th one, yeah. You loosen the 6 visible ones on both sides. We come to this side, do the exact same thing. The 6 visible bolts that you can see, we loosen them up counterclockwise. Give it just a couple turns. Once you get those 6 loosened up, alignment tool right here, you remove it again, and you give it one full rotation one more time until the motor is actually at top dead center this time. So you give it one full spin, lock it in place, and you do the same thing, but with the opposite 6 bolts that we weren't able to reach previously. You now loosen them up.
You're gonna have to blow out your finger.
Oh yeah, because there's blood on it?
Mm-hmm. You don't want to be canceled.
What this procedure does is it allows us to take the spindle that's inside the Vanos gear, the helical gear, and it loosens it up. That way there's no pressure, you can actually remove them all. If you haven't seen my video on the E46 M3 head rebuild and timing that we've done, it's actually very similar. I'll link it over here. How the Vanos works on this motor is very similar to how the E46 Vanos works. After you loosen up the screws, you put it back to top dead center, piston 1, up, valves up, nothing's touching each other, so this is top dead center. Ideally, there are timing tools where you align the camshafts and you lock them in place. You take a bolt, I forget what size, this might be an M8 by whatever, as long as it's wide enough for that hole to fit in. Something you can lock your camshaft to this bracket. If it's wide enough, if it's like a bolt like this where it's perfectly the right width and it locks the cam in place, you should be solid. So if you look inside, see how the opening closes and it opens? There's a place to lock these cams in. And once that opening aligns with this opening of the little cap, that's when your cams are actually perfectly in time. To remove the Vanos, there's a few bolts that you gotta remove. It's gonna be a 5mm hex. You unscrew this, that, and a few on the side over here. You unscrew all those bolts and you start to pull it off, little by little. In the BMW instructions, it says to take a flathead and pry this Vanos unit off. There's a little space for it right here. And there should be a little space for it right there. And you pry it off, and there might be a bunch of oil leaking out from the bottom. In theory, there we go. We have to unscrew the Vanos from the Vanos gears themselves. As you can see, this one right here, that's a 10 mil. The one right behind it, the one that's connected to the actual helical gear, that is a 7 mil. You just unscrew it, and you do the same thing to both sides, and your Vanos should be removed. Simple as that. And now you can remove the helical gears. And don't worry about this. I mean, there's a special way to put these back in when we're gonna be doing timing. But you do the same thing on the other side, and that's how you remove the Vanos from the S62, dude, seriously. For us to remove these timing covers, right, there's 3 pieces to this. There's this left one, the right one, and then the whole center one. Before you remove them, this section, the cylinders 1 through 4, have a timing chain tensioner, which you gotta remove. It's a 19mm. It's kind of in an unusual spot. It's right over the AC compressor, and it's right around here somewhere. You remove it, unloosen it, loosen the chain, remove the covers. That one's a little bit iffy. You start off with the top bolts, and then you get down to the middle ones, then you get down to the side low ones, and then the 3 middle ones right here. And then you kind of wiggle your way out. Keep in mind that there's a little gasket here and a little gasket on the other side. The head gaskets are actually shared among these covers, right? So, also, keep in mind that this guide is not supposed to be here, so I'm really curious to what it's like. Lift it up just a little bit. Actually, let me show you. You see how these holes right here? Little dowels go inside of these, right? This one and that one. See how they're a little bit longer? That's specifically designed, I'm pretty sure, for you to pull this cover up a little bit, and then you have to pull it to back, right? So you take it, you pull it up, and you kind of pull it off like that. There we go. Oh, this one was so much easier. As you can see, this guide is demolished. Great, we're gonna have to be fishing this stuff out. Well, now we're moving on to the center cover. Mine's at top dead. For you to remove it, obviously the harmonic balancer has to be locked in place because there's 5 or 6 bolts on the inside. You take off this pulley system, right? There's 6 13mm bolts, and then you take an E14 socket and you remove these 4 bolts right here, and then this harmonic balancer just kind of removes, and it's simple. Now we're going to be taking off this middle portion, this middle cover. There's a bunch of bolts here, so here's the diagram. This is how you remove it.
Tell them the story.
Hey, after 3.5 hours, maybe 4, I realized you have to take off the oil pan to do this job. Let's drain the oil, dude. Look at that. More pieces of the timing chain guide. Mental. That's crazy. That is crazy. So yeah, as you can see, you have to remove all these little bolts, and you gotta remove this little oil pan. So now we're gonna look underneath, and we're gonna find the other bolts that hold on the center timing cover, and we're gonna remove that. We're gonna remove those, and we're gonna try to remove the cover. 6 bolts. 2 of the bolts are underneath this cover. You gotta remove this cover. There's 2 bolts on this side, you gotta remove these. There's gonna be 4 total. There we are. We have access, baby. As you can imagine, there are obviously a ton of broken plastic pieces. By the way, when you're removing that front cover, be really careful. Oh my God. Be really careful in terms of the head gasket, because we're going to be reusing the head gaskets, obviously, and the oil pan gasket, because we're not taking the heads off. They're pretty sturdy, we'll clean them up, but just be careful with that. Yeah, man, so I'm gonna have to do some deep cleaning here. Remove all these shards. Look at all this. This is disintegrated. And this is why you do preventative maintenance. Should have known, but also I just got this car, maybe put on 1,000 miles on it. So, and for now, this is where this video is gonna end. In the next one, we're gonna be actually taking off and replacing all the chain guides and the timing chain itself. So stay tuned, subscribe, and keep a lookout for the next one. Peace.